Bueno, una vez más, bienvenidos a todos a Alicante. Algunos habéis llegado hoy, aunque llegue tarde. Así que, bueno, ya está bien de tanto inglés, ¿no? Vamos a hacer una charla en español. No pasa nada. This is Spain. Nah, it's just a joking. Okay, I was giving everyone a welcome. I'm going to talk in English, but okay, it's just a stupid joke. Okay. I'm going to talk about this case study. It's a real application. Okay, it's a real React component library that I've built myself. I said us, but it's just a team of 2 people. Okay, it's me and the CSS guy. No more people, no more team. Can you hear me well? Yep. Okay, perfect. I'm not going to talk about the sponsors because we have already kissed their, a lot these 2 days. But I didn't have any slide to present myself because I'm just another random JavaScript guy, My name is FLAVIO Corpa, or Flavius in English. It's a Latin name, so the meaning is quite interesting. You can look it up. All I can say about myself is that I'm a JavaScript engineer because I do Node in my side projects. I recently joined the Egghead platform as an instructor. I'm quite pumped to be part of that because it's an awesome platform. Working-wise, I work as a front-end engineer right now. I used to say that I was a senior front-end developer, but now I say more often that I'm a front-end engineer. And you might be wondering, what's the real difference? Well, the only real difference is that now I can configure Webpack all by myself. It's really the only difference. So to begin with this talk, have you ever developed your own React component library completely from scratch? Please raise your hands. Awesome. When I say completely, yeah, Javi, of course. When I say completely, okay, keep your hands up. When I say completely, I mean even the icons completely from scratch. Yeah, this is a pain in the ass, okay? So it seems that all of us have been reinventing the wheel on and on. We're all constantly building our React component libraries for no reason because what Javi is trying to achieve, for example, is awesome. A core library of components, agnostic of their styles, just the behavior. That's the real meaning, the real power of a component. And the only thing that changes between my button and your button is the stupid styling, okay? So if we really had only one library of components that are just the behavior, the actual component, the actual primitive, we won't be reinventing the wheel. Other engineering families don't reinvent the wheel. But in computer science, we do it every week, every weekend as well. So I think this can be improved. In fact, you might not probably learn anything new from this talk, because this is what I learned in the process of building my own React component library for the company I work for right now. For some stupid legal reason, I cannot tell you which is my client, which is my employee, but my name and surname is a pretty unique combination. You can very easily Google myself up, and you will find out like this. So, okay. This is a private React component library that we built for them. And we're going to talk about what we learned from here so that every time you do this yourself, you don't come up with the same walls as I did. You can just jump over them and go to something else. Maybe, go for beers and spend that useful time in something else. But first of all, why Lucentum? Because we call this component library Lucentum. Okay, I don't know how would you say that in English, because the of the Spanish, you don't really like it, but Lucentum. Okay. Well, first a bit of history. Since you're in Alicante this weekend, sorry, Alicante. It's not Alicante, okay? It's Alicante. It's Spanish. Since you're in Alicante this weekend, you can take the tram at some point and go to the Lucentum tram station. You have a 5-minute walk and you find this, which are ancient Roman ruins, okay? Because Lucentum was the name that the Romans gave the very, very primitive core of the city of Alicante, and we still have ruins of that. And it literally means the city of light, which I think is an awesome name in Latin, Lucentum. Why the name? Well, as you might have probably seen from this propaganda they gave you yesterday, Alicante has like 320 days of sun a year. I would say it's 360. okay? It's more accurate. And it makes total, complete sense that it's a city of light. So since it's the first and maybe the unique component library that it was born in Alicante, we named it Lucentum, okay? That's the explanation behind the name. So to make it more interesting, I'm going to talk about the initial stack that we chose and maybe how we changed it in the way. You can also learn something useful for this as well. Well, of course, we chose React because it's like the best UI component library right now. No offense. And if I weren't have chosen React, I wouldn't be here talking about this. So it makes completely sense. And for styling, we chose CSS modules and Sass. This was 2016, so it made completely sense at that time. But we had some problems with this, and I'm going to expand a little bit more on this later. For testing, I actually convinced the managers and everyone involved that we needed 100% coverage in the testing. They allowed me to do so, so I chose Jest and Enzyme. I'm completely happy with that. Snapshot testing is awesome. You should completely do it. It's awesome. And in Spain, it's actually pretty rare. They seldom allow you to do unit testing in the front end. So I consider myself very, very, very privileged, sadly. It's very sad to say that in an international conference, but it is true. Okay? So first, let's talk about the block component, okay? This is like the most basic component that we have. I wanted to put a building block there, but apparently there's no stupid emoji for a building block. There's only boxes, and well, it's more or less it's useful for that purpose. So we decided that our API, we wanted to look like that, you know. The block is our main layout component. So we decided that we wanted to go for some approach kind of looking like Bootstrap for the calls, but with props, like more declarative. And we use a lot of synonyms. Instead of the width 1 of 4, you can say 1 of 2, 1 of 12. It doesn't matter. It's just to make it clear to the developer. And you might have noticed that we don't use class names here, so you use actual props. And we have an icon, which does exactly the same. We don't have this stupid icon, and the prop is icon, and the variable is icon as well, which I completely hate. Okay? So we decided that we were going to build on top of this API because at the end of the day, this is our main focus. My main focus was developer experience because this is a library for internal use of my company. Okay, so we wanted to focus mainly on developers and try to make it as intuitive and as easy to use as possible. So the CSS guy started, you know, typing like crazy in his computer and did the CSS with Sass, and I cut it there. But you can imagine the rest of the CSS. It is crazy, you know. He used a mixin for the whole layouting thing. We also do responsive as well. So you can imagine the amounts of lines of code of CSS that are just behind there. And if you have ever tried React like seriously, you can imagine the JavaScript for this component, right? With all that amount of CSS and wanting to provide that as a prop first kind of component, you can imagine already the JavaScript code. The same happened with the icons. As I said, they were completely made from scratch. We had a very, very amazing designer. She's so minimalist, you cannot even imagine. She's Greek. We call her the Greek goddess of design because she's awesome, really. And so she made like 40, 50 icons completely from scratch, very minimalistic, and they were awesome. She exported the file, gave it to us, and here we went. So I just put this slide again to notice that we're not saying icon, icon, or icon type, and you specify a string. We just use that prop, and we have a very good documentation powered by React Storybooks, in which you can literally see all the possible prop types that that component has, and therefore you can have a look, a hint of the icons as well. So we wanted it to look like that. And of course, the exported CSS files upon which we don't have any control absolutely about them look like this, like with hundreds and hundreds of lines of code more. They're called Lucentum icons, okay? And basically, if you haven't done custom icons, it's quite easy. It's just a font, a very fancy font. You have a content of every item assigned to a specific character in the font, and that's the icon. It's not very fancy. I thought it was going to be something very, very difficult, but it wasn't in the end. So again, we have this huge amount of CSS. How do you do the JavaScript? There has to be a better way. The JavaScript code was absolutely awful, you can imagine. If the CSS is huge, then the JavaScript must be huge, and that's not good. We saw yesterday that the bugs in your code are proportional to the number of lines of your code. That's completely true. So the more lines of code you have, more bugs you have. And more you will have to debug, more time you will spend trying to maintain it, and so on and so forth. So let's see what was the solution to this. Have you ever used the Node package class names? Please raise your hands. Class names. Awesome. Thank you. It's pretty common, right? Here's my implementation of class names. Okay, it's just one line of code. Basically, it filters for everything that is truthy, and it's just a stupid join with spaces, because for some reason in React, class name has to be a unique string. You cannot give it an array of strings or anything. It just accepts one. So we can either go funky and work with your array of class names that are all strings and then end up with the join yourself, or you can use class names. Apparently, everyone got used to class name as well. So this library was made by Jed Watson, and I got amazed at how simply the implementation was. And I found this. It has 3 million downloads a month, okay? And I said, okay, if this guy wrote a library of 2 lines of code, literally, that gets 3 million downloads a month, I can do the same. I can do it. Okay, let's try it. Doesn't work like that, I promise. But maybe if you've worked with class names a bit more deeply, you might argue, oh, Flavio, it's not like that. You know, class names, you can give objects. You can give n number of objects. And the actual key of the object is the class name, and the value will tell you if you have to use that key as a class name or not. Okay, I can give you that. You're right. This is my implementation, full implementation of class names. Can you hear me fine? At the end, at the bottom? How do you say that? The end of the room? Okay, perfect, thank you. So I'm very crazy about functional programming in JavaScript. It's not very difficult. To begin with, you just start with filter, map, and reduce, and you can do really awesome things with just those 3 functions. So I promise you, I'll try that. I did TDD with that. I wrote all the tests of class names and then implemented myself. And I promise as well that it's just 1 line of code, right? It's only that Prettier is stupid and put it in 10 lines and 14 lines. It's okay, because I no longer care about how I format my code. Prettier takes care of that. If you have to learn something from this conference, I think this is like the millionth time that we say it, please use Prettier. It was so needed in JavaScript ecosystem, really. So Prettier, instead of 1 line, I like to show off about my one-liners, but Prettier didn't allow me to do. It's 14 lines, okay. But the actual code of class names is like 52 lines of code. And this is something I try to do, not to show off, but to challenge myself, okay? Once I understand what I have to do, I like to try my own implementation, and if I can, refactor it. And you learn a lot, especially if you refactor code from others or see others' code, or you already see anyone else refactoring, you can really, really, really learn a lot from that. I strongly recommend that you do this. It might sound like a nerdy thing, but I really, really enjoy it. Yeah, optimizing JavaScript and refactoring code as well. So what was the solution to my icons and block problem? Well, I created, a library, and I called it react-css-props. And what does this library do? Well, it's quite easy, okay? It's just a higher-order function. You have to give it as the first argument your theme from CSS modules. Remember, I was using CSS modules and Sass. And you have to destructure in your component all the props you don't want to take care of. You just don't want to manage explicitly, okay? So you just destructure the props that you care about, and you leave the rest to the rest sprayed operator to props. And then you give to your new function that you have to declare, in this case to CSS, with also, again, the array rest operator. You pass it the rest of the props, and what this basically does is just returns an array of strings that you can pass to class names or join yourself, and it works pretty fine. So this solves completely our use case for the block, and this is more or less fairly enough. The implementation we have right now is more or less pseudocode, but it's pretty similar to the actual version of the block component that we have. Okay, but what about the icons? Because we wanted to do almost the same, but with the icons. And as I told you before, the icons were generated by a page called Icomoon. Have you ever used it? It just, that's right. It just spits at you lots and lots of files, okay? And you choose less, SAS, another thing, and you can use your CSS selector strategy. It's pretty nice, but you don't have any power of how Icomoon controls this. So in this case, all our names for the icons were preceded by the word icon. So my current implementation of my library didn't support that. So I thought, okay, this is JavaScript, this is functional programming. You can just provide a mapper function and solve this issue. Okay, it's quite easy. So the first argument of the library of react-css-props is the theme again, and the second is a mapper function with maps to the actual name of the class name that you are looking to use in your components. And the rest of the code is exactly the same. Was it successful? Well, 33 downloads. I hope really after this weekend someone else tries it out, because it's fairly enough the same complexity as class names, and it works pretty fine. It's a dependency to my project and only project in the world that uses it, but maybe it's just useful for you as well, okay? Let's go with the button component. As we have said before, it seems like everyone is doing their own button components, and it's so annoying. This is more or less the basic implementation of our button component. You can learn some things from this, for example, because we decided that we were going to implement a React component library, a UI kit. We decided that more or less all of our components should be stateless, right? Because that's what a UI is, just something that receives something and outputs the view. You shouldn't have any state in the view components. There are some exceptions to this, but I've seen many React component libraries that start with a very basic React component, and they start with class syntax, and they create an actual component. It's okay, but you know, the Facebook core team promised at some point, and we have that registered in GitHub and all over the internet, so they can't lie now, that at some point they will improve the React core, and stateless function components will render and will be more optimized than the class syntax. So if you're already doing stateless functions, if you don't really need state or lifecycle methods, you're already typing the React of the future, right? You're making future-proof code, which is something that it's always valuable. Okay, so we can learn another useful things. Like, for example, it's true that you have to provide your own styling to your components, but you always want to give an escape hat, right? To allow some minimum amount of customization over your components. So that's why this name, this thing is for. You destructure the class name, you pass it as well to the class names library, because if someone wants to override your styles, okay, they can just do their own class name and pass it to your component. Quite basic. And also, I think that I like a lot, that I think it's a best practice in React, is if you want your components to be flexible and to be reusable, you don't know how many props people are going to need, right? And I didn't want to take care of on mouse leave, on mouse enter, on hover, all of those things. So I just destructure the ones that I care about, leave the rest to props, and pass the rest of the properties down to the actual DOM element that is going to actually use it. This makes it very easy to use your components, and avoids you to someone opening a GitHub issue saying, I cannot really pass this data property to your component, you know, because it doesn't pass it down to the DOM, and it prevents you from things like that. Of course, there are some properties and some things that you really don't want ending up in your DOM. You have to blacklist those. No, sorry. whitelist those, okay? But apart from that, it's an idea that I think we can all share, because I found myself using another React libraries, and the problem it was that they weren't using this strategy. So every time I wanted to use another library with that and add a custom property that that component didn't need, but the one I was using did, I was screwed, literally. So if it's free for you and it doesn't cause you any insecurity or any issue or any security hole in your components, just do it, because it's a good thing to have. And another thing which is quite weird is, this was a library focused on developer experience. So I can give you an icon which you can say save, edit, upload, or whatever, but I have to use it like that. It's quite weird, but it works, okay? So you can give it a calculated property using the spread operator and using the brackets of the object. In the end, props are just an object with, if they are booleans, with all their values set to true in React. So that's why this works. If someone has a better solution for this, please tell me, because this was the only thing that came up to my mind. And for the moment, it's working quite nicely. Okay, let's go with the DatePicker. I hate the DatePickers. I think they are the worst thing in the universe. I think they're like the hugest black hole in the computer science environment. If you really can avoid using DatePickers, please do so, because they are a source of desperation, and there are I cannot even express myself. Okay, but if you have to do them, there are pretty nice solutions. Okay, this is there are pretty nice solutions. This was our design for a DatePicker. It looked quite nice, right? I said, okay, since it's a date range DatePicker, I might use Airbnb's one that I loved at the moment. I think it's like the best DatePicker you can have in the world. But I couldn't use it in the end. I will explain to you right now why. Have you seen that stupid drop-down close to the... Okay, so my client needed to go quickly to dates 300 years ago, okay? So apparently there was a Japanese trademark that was registered in the 17th century. So, and our calendars, the regular DatePicker, are thought to have July and August, just 2 months, one beneath the other. Not this month in the 17th century, and in the second, in the 2 calendar, the date of today is just pointless. Plus, we have this I hate this as well, already pre-default ranges of dates, okay? I couldn't really find any library to help me to do this, so I had to do it myself. It was a pain in the ass. I don't recommend it to anyone. But yeah, I had these 2 specific user cases, business logic, so I had to completely do it on my own. So once you are already set to do DatePicker components, you're obviously we're going to manage dates, which is like the worst thing to do in JavaScript as well. And you're going to maybe or maybe not rely on Moment, which is like a huge library. And it's just a source of frustration that I don't recommend to anyone. Well, let's go on to another component, the language component. This one was pretty nice as well. Of course, because my client, well, the only thing I can say about my client, okay, this sounds kind of mysterious, is that it's a European organization. So it's a public organization, so it has to support out of the box the 23 languages of the European Union, plus some other countries that join them for trademark purposes, okay? So the designer came up with this very fancy-looking drop-down, and of course, like the best UX experience is to see, okay, if you are from another of those weird languages I cannot even read, I want to read the name of my language in my own language, right? For example, okay, I know this is Espanol, but what the fuck is this? And this. So I put this tooltip you can barely see because the way I took the screenshot is quite crappy, but it's Macedonian, okay? The rest I have no idea at all. But I think it's a good thing to support both things, to be focus on user experience, but also give some hints in case anyone is curious or just want to read what actually puts in there. So what do we use for internationalization? Because it's a big issue in our company. Well, this is not the actual icon for React INTL, but it's the Egghead course. Sorry for the spamming. You can check it out. It's a very nice course. And this works nicely, because I introduced this to the front-end architect in our company, and he told me, we don't need that library. We have our literals web service made in Java, of course, and it's enough. We give it a string of a key string, and it returns another string in the language that we need it. But this library also handles currency, dates, time, not only literals, so it's definitely worth checking out. I recommend you to use it. You might be wondering, who is the genius who did this library? It wasn't me, okay. So, but who did that? Because I think it's the library with the highest number of stars in GitHub. And I was very, very surprised when I saw that YAHOO made it. So yes, guys, they're still alive. And apparently, apart from YAHOO Answers, of course, and apparently they do now React libraries, which is awesome. I like the new approach. Okay, so I'm going to move ahead to the worst component you can do ever. We cannot even come up with a name for this component because it's an all-in-one component, and it's my worst nightmare. I still have nightmares with this component, literally. It's a select. It's supposed to be as simple as a select or an autocomplete, so that other people call it Typeahead. I don't really care. I call it the magic component, okay? It's just a select. And you know in a moment why it is a magic component. So the easiest way of using this component, it looks like this. It looks like a normal select, but it's not a normal select, okay? You can actually click on the icon there, and it has a it has a drag and drop that allows you to drop an image, because you can do image search in this website, okay? And you might notice this. It's not disabled. It's a header that sticks there while you scroll over the options, okay? That killed me. And it's not only a regular select, because, in a regular select, you just have options. You can just write your thing, and this gets highlighted, but you don't have columns, okay? They wanted columns, really. I didn't understand why, but they needed them. And they killed me as well, because now you end up with 4 rows of options, and it's completely crazy. And the other thing, which is even crazier, is that if you are going to type an option, and whatever that you are typing is not already on the list, you have to be prompted with the option of adding this to the list, which is the first thing. So imagine doing this component, and I'm just getting started. So in any point building your own React component library, you have to decide between 2 things. Should I make my complete from scratch implementation, or should I use an already existing one and try to improve it? This is a thing every engineer has to consider at some point. In this case, I was a fool, and I decided to use React Select. Have you ever worked with React Select? It was also made, by the way, by Jed Watson. I don't know if any of you are friends to him. I think he might be a nice guy, but I don't have any good experience with React Select. So if you read through the API, the documentation is more or less okay. You have to dive into the code from time to time because it's not complete. Actually, he stopped maintaining it a year ago. He has hundreds of pull requests and issues open. And from time to time, he merges whatever that others are doing in the library and releases new release candidate versions, which is okay. It's more or less stable. So reading through the documentation, you could see that actually you can provide a custom option component to render the options, a custom value component to render the values in whatever shape or form you can even imagine, and a custom filter function in case you just don't want to filter alphabetically your options for some stupid reason, okay? So it is quite modular, quite easy to use, quite customizable, unless you do crazy things. And these are the kinds of crazy things that they wanted us to do. This is exactly the same select, but with a completely different shape, okay? They really wanted the options to be like a grid inside the select, okay? And if that wasn't all, they wanted a tooltip inside the select that changed depending on the... Can I cry? Depending on the option you were hovering, they wanted a different tooltip information about what they were hovering at. This is called the nice class. It's not nice class, okay? This is not nice. It's called like that because of the city. Because in intellectual property, apparently there's a thing called the nice class, which is quite important for lawyers, and you don't want to screw up here. So this is called the nice class. And the next one, I know there are many people from Vienna here. Love you all. This is the Vienna code. This is also very important in intellectual property, okay? Because apparently everything in the world that ever had a trademark or a design has a Vienna code and a nice class. So this was another completely different select, okay? They wanted nested children, okay? And the ability to toggle, you know, and to close and open these options. Up to 3 levels. Can you sincerely imagine, try to implement something like this? Can you imagine my nightmare I've been through? And there's the testing thing. You remember I said we used 100% coverage, and that is true. Is Forbes still here? Forbes, can you raise your hands? Okay, I think he's not. He said that it was almost impossible to test a select component like this one, and I completely agree. You cannot imagine the amount of divs and shit that that component has inside. It's almost impossible to test it on its own. So every time we change one of these components, because this is exactly the same component, remember, even though it has different flavors, it's just one component that we call the select component. So every time we decided to change something on the nice class, change something on the Vienna code, we crashed the other cases, because this is also the regular just single select option as well. We use it for that as well. And we couldn't really ensure to anyone that we were going to touch the component and they wouldn't break the other cases. So this was completely crazy. And this was not my fault, okay? There was a project manager that was very, very smart, and it wanted to be like that. And it forced me to do it like that. It was the worst error in my mind. Don't ever trust project managers. Don't let them decide about the code, please. They have no idea. You already know that, but I didn't, okay? So this was awful, but in the end, it now works, sort of, more or less. And I learned a very, very, very valuable lesson from this that I want to share with you. And is that, this is a quote of myself, okay? But I'm sorry, but maybe someone probably said it before, but I don't know. So abstractions are good, but not always, you know? React select is already an abstraction of the native select component that the HTML has. And we were doing an abstraction over the React select, which means that it's an abstraction of an abstraction, okay? And if they were trying to use it, they will wrap it again, and it would be an abstraction of an abstraction of an abstraction, and it's not funny anymore. So imagine our use case, we were building a UI component library. We just wanted to style the component. So I should have just exported the CSS for that component and tell the people, okay, use React select to do all these funky things and use my style sheet. Because that's the only thing that was assigned to me, to make it look like these wonderful designs. But in this case, the abstraction was not good, because the developers that actually used this component didn't have access to the inner state of the component, and they shouldn't have state either. And they couldn't change things. So we had to fix and back and forth, try to adjust it to every single step of the process. So sometimes it's good to use an abstraction. I think this has been proven. They have proven benefits from that. But abstraction is not a thing that you should do always. That's a very valuable lesson that I think you can learn. And I learned it the really hard way, so please don't be like me. Another component, the map. I call it the stupid map. You might wonder why. This component literally yes, okay, you can see the animation. This single component took a whole month of my entire life, okay? So you don't want to spend a month of your life doing a stupid component. That's why it's the stupid map. So they wanted this world map, very fancy, And they wanted this zoom interaction that allows you to zoom on a specific continent, and then you have information upon every country that you zoom in, and this sort of things, okay? Of course, I couldn't find any library to do this. Maybe I was the first one to do it, I don't know. But my first implementation looked like this. So I started to learn a lot about D3, you know, a lot about SVG topo.json file, which is just a very, very funky version of all the coordinates of the world translated into a very huge JSON file. Okay, it's quite interesting. And actually, the coordinates for this JSON file match the coordinates of the latitude and longitude of the Earth. It's quite interesting. But you know, have you seen that many dependencies? Okay, it's 1 megabyte of dependencies just for the map. Plus, I decided to use data maps, which is a library meant to be used with vanilla JavaScript, okay? And for injecting the map in the proper place, you had to use this find DOM node thing that you should never use in React. Well, you can use it, that's why it's there, but not always. So it wasn't maybe the React kind of thing as you should do things until this came up. I was already spending, well, I estimated myself the task, and I said, okay, this will take me a month. The managers agreed, no problem. I spent the three months until I finished it. No, 3 months, no, sorry, 3 weeks, okay. Yeah, my estimation was quite good. I'm very good doing estimations. And I spent 3 weeks, and this came up, okay, and I was completely screwed because they say, okay, they solved this in a much nicer way, in a React-like way. And what this library does, React Simple Maps, is just render native SVGs inside the React component and handle that SVG. No access, none unintended access to the DOM, not any weird stuff, no find DOM node, anything. If you have a look at the guy who wrote this, is awesome. He explains how difficult it is to render a map using SVGs natively inside a React component, and you can really learn a lot from this, and it's quite impressive. So just by migrating what I already have to this library, I cut like an 80% of my dependencies, which is something that you should take care of if you're a developer in general, not only a JavaScript developer. So I was quite happy. Actually, they didn't support many things. As I said, they weren't using the spread operator to pass down some props. I opened a GitHub issue, and there's a guy called Richard Zimmerman in that company called Z Creative Labs from Switzerland that was very supportive. It was like Sean Larkin. Do you know Sean Larkin from Webpack? You know, this kind of helpful man that always tries to help anyone on GitHub. This guy was exactly like that, and I owe him a lot because with his help and explanations and actually releases of React's Simple Maps, I was able to finally finish. And in 1 week, I migrated everything I had to this library, and the result is 100 times better. So by now you might be wondering, well, which is the current state of your library? Well, now it's finished. We're in the maintaining phase, which sucks completely. I hate to maintain things. It's much funnier to just develop. But we're now adding Flow. Has anyone used Flow here in the room? Okay, and TypeScript? Okay, more or less the same amount of person, okay. I like both. I think they match the same purpose. We were using Create React App to bootstrap a very, very Raft version of the app. So Create React App has already out-of-the-box Flow integration. So just start typing Flow is very, very easy. It's just a 3-step process. That was my very first video on Egghead. This is a lot of spam, I know, but sorry. React with Flow type in Create React App. You can look it up on the internet, okay? And it's just a 3-step process, and you can already start progressively typing your code to Flow, just adding that Flow annotation. It was quite nice. And for the rest of you who might not know Flow, it has already been discussed in this conference. Is it just a static type checker for JavaScript? It's very nice. It allows you to integrate progressively the typing annotations. You don't have to completely configure again your Webpack or Babel thing like you have to do with TypeScript, unfortunately. So because Create React App supported it out of the box, we decided to migrate to Flow. And just by start using Flow, we already catch in development time bugs that the developers didn't even find yet for the moment, but they were there waiting to come out to the light. And we caught them, we killed them, and moved forward. Of course, we're still maintaining it, but adding flow not only helped us, but we're in the process of adding the flow type definitions to our building chain so that we export them with the library, and the developers using flow get autocomplete of all the components of our app, all the type, of the properties of the components, all this stuff. This is both true for TypeScript and Flow, and it's definitely nice. And we move to the most difficult thing, I think, in the React ecosystem right now, which is the theming. Okay? So we built all our component library with the primary color set to blue, because it was a European Union organization. But at some point, they want to customize slightly the components. So they want theming. And as I said before, we're using CSS modules and Sass, which is great because because we use variables all across. We used imports, explicit imports, and that sort of things. But at the end of the day, if you wanted to use our library, we didn't want the developers using it to compile their own toolchain, just to compile our Sass and JavaScript. So we just build a production build with Webpack and export them the CSS, and they had to import the CSS like that. Because, of course, if you use this approach to styling in React, you have to import two things, your JavaScript and your CSS. And it was like that. Really, there's nothing better to do this? Yes, you had some options. You could either take our whole library and compile it yourself, changing the Sass variables, which I think it's the worst case scenario. Or you can do your own Node compiler that just took the variables, compiled the CSS, Node Sass-based program, just took all the Sass and compiled a different dist.css and used that instead. But again, it was not nice. It was like a lot of work again, and there should be something better. So this came to save us, as everyone else apparently in this conference. We checked style components. In fact, when I was just starting this project, this library, styled components was in alpha or beta, and I kind of like it at all. You know, the initial reaction is not good. You see CSS inside of JavaScript and you say, what the fuck? But it happened the same to people coming to React with JSX, okay? Because they thought it's HTML inside of JavaScript, even though it's not HTML. But you tend to love it. The current makes you to love it because both HTML and CSS are meant to be static. You know, they're not programming languages. So if you use them inside JavaScript, you get the full power of our dynamic, 100% dynamic language as is JavaScript with CSS and with JavaScript. So JSS or CSS in JavaScript is the natural end up of the CSS ecosystem, at least in React, because you have full power of JavaScript to do whatever you want, and there's no need anymore for an import of the CSS, which is awesome. You import just a JavaScript file, and that already has the styles calculated inside of them. But the fanciest thing, the best thing of this, is that we exported all the default theme for Lucentum, and again, it has been talked about in this conference, but it's worth saying it again. You had this theme provider. So if you want to use our components just out of the box as they are, you didn't have to use the theme provider or our default theme. But if you wanted to customize it, to make it completely different looking components, you just have to do this. You just have to take our theme, spread the props, modify the variables that you wanted, that we have very well defined in our documentation, in our API, and pass it to the theme provider. And the result is all JavaScript calculating your CSS, and is this. You can have even different styling between your application. Please don't do that. Just do different applications with different styling. But it was a very naive and easy way of doing theming in JavaScript. I think it's for sure the best way to do theming right now, you know, in JavaScript. I really like this quote from Linus Torvalds, or Linus? Yes, Linus. Talk is cheap, show me the code. So is Lucentum open source? Can you check the code? I'm very proud of the code, actually. I really want to show it up. But you know what? no, JavaScript. Spain is not very supportive of open source in general, companies in Spain. I know there are some Americans among you, and I'm really, really jealous of you, you know, because America in computer science is like 5 years ahead of Spain, literally. Even Microsoft changed the way they were being into completely an open source company right now. And I really wish Spanish companies follow them, because open source is a win-to-win, right? We can all learn from anyone, we can share knowledge, and that's awesome. It has already been done with mathematics and physics. Why can't we do it with code as well? So no, you cannot do it. But speaking of open source, whom of you have never heard of Hacktoberfest? Never heard? Okay. I wear a T-shirt very proudly, Hacktoberfest 2015. And it starts tomorrow, okay? It's an initiative from GitHub and DigitalOcean. And basically, you do 4 pull requests to any public repo in GitHub from your friends, yourself, whoever, and you get out an exclusive free T-shirt this year, okay? It's awesome because the main goal is not to get the T-shirt, is to introduce people to the open source, is to evangelize with open source, to make people get into it, to try it, to see the benefits, because open source has already given us, all of us, a lot. But what can we give to open source? So Oktoberfest, Hacktoberfest, very nice change, game of words. It's like this tribute to the open source we can all of us participate in, and I really encourage you to do it. Lucentum might eventually get open source, but not for the moment. I'm very sorry, but I hope you learned something from this presentation. So that was it. Thank you. These are my GitHub and my Twitter handle. You can check them out. And if there's any question, I would be very happy to answer.
How difficult was it to migrate to styled components?
We're in the process, yeah. It's not very difficult, actually, because we already have all of our CSS scoped per component, and we have this. Every component has its own file with the JavaScript, the CSS, and the README. And we don't have any global CSS in all the applications, so in reality, all we have to do is do a file called styles javascript.js instead of CSS, and just wrap them in style components and use them in our index.js components. So it's not that difficult. It might take 1 day or 2 to migrate any component. The map is already in style components because the styling was very, very minimal. So I made it already with style components. But we're still in the process, and it might take us like half a month to migrate it. But we have already agreed that with the managers, so we're doing it, and we're very happy that they accept it. Any other question at the end? So it's fairly easy to migrate. I'm very happy with that, actually. And it's so much powerful, really. It's like,
yeah,
it's
thanks
awesome.
for presentation. Have
welcome.
you considered CSS variables or custom properties for theming?
Yes, we use Sass variables. So
not Sass.
I know. CSS properties.
Yeah.
But you have exactly the same problem. You only have them by the time you compile them, but once you export the CSS, you cannot override them anymore.
No, you can.
Well, if you have the file with the CSS properties, you mean?
Yeah, you can theme as the CSS properties with the colors or border radius or sizes, and then you kind of have one separate CSS for theme and a separate CSS for your application.
Yes, I understand, but the approach that style components follows is that you don't have any import from the theme inside the components. You use the theme that you have inside the props, because that will be provided via the context API of React, and will inject the theme in every component. So if you use the CSS native props, you couldn't use this theming and theme provider thing inside of your style components. So you are...
Yeah, I mean, like before styled components, maybe you consider this.
Yeah. In fact, we wanted to migrate our Sass to post CSS with CSS props. But then after that, I think we had the same issue as Javi. Style components came up, provided a much better solution, and we definitely wanted to migrate it to it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other question? Yep, at the end of the end.
Again about the styles, and imagine if you, if you are to create a new theme,
Yep.
You have also to download the whole project and create a new build to create a new theme. I mean, it's the same as before when you were with SAS.
No, not really, because if you do code splitting, for example, the only thing you really need is the object, the original object with the theme, and just have to override that. And well, you're using our component library, so you're already downloading all the library. So this is just one import that shows that among with all the components that you need, we're already giving you as well the default theme so that you can override it. So it's not an extra.
So you have like, for example, an initializer or something like this, and you can pass this object and so that you can change the theme or something.
Yeah, that's the magic of style components. You can pass this custom theme provider at any point in your JSX tree, and it will override via the context API just the components that are inside that theme provider. So that's why it allows you to have multiple theme providers inside the same application. But we just really use one theme provider and the main component and the app component, and every application we do, we override that theme, and we don't touch it anymore. There's no more theme providers across the application.
Okay, thank you.
There's another question here at the second row. Please follow.
What about post-CSX and migrating to styled components? Like, for example, we use some post-CSS plugins like CSS Next. Is it even possible to use something like this in styled components?
It's exactly the same as using SAS. At the end, post-CSS gives you the same tools, but more native, like the future CSS-like, the native CSS variable standard. And it doesn't matter if you use CSS, SAS or less, or post-CSS, because you are doing them inside of CSS modules. And therefore, you're going to have to compile your CSS, and you end up having exactly the same problem as we had. But from migrating that to style components is exactly the same thing. Instead of dollars, you have to migrate all the variables with the dash, and it's fairly the same easy thing to do. Another question here?
Just a quick one.
Okay.
So basically now, if you import a component, you import it with all the styles, and
with or without? With or without?
Yeah, from your library. When the developers use like single components, it comes with all the styles. Do you have some kind of a reset, and where do you import that?
Can you repeat? Sorry, I haven't.
Do you have a reset, like a CSS reset, and where is that imported?
No, ours is not an agnostic from style component library. It's an already defined, clearly design-wise defined component library. So we ship it with all the styles that you need. We provide some hooks, as I have seen, I have showed you before, with some class name option that you can override. Using Javi's approach, you might be also able to override the styles using style components. And so you always have this escape hatch independent from our style. So I don't know if it does answer your question. I hope it does. No more questions? Okay, thank you very much.